Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to be going through a live draw with me video, and as you can see I'm going to be drawing figures in my tan sketchbook. This is just a sketchbook that I picked up from an art store years ago, and I literally am just trying to use the pages at this point. So that's why I thought it would be nice to do some figure drawing, because I am terrible at figure drawing. If you've noticed on this channel, I'm pretty much an architecture or landscape drawing type of person. I don't really draw humans because I'm bad at them, and I think maybe that's a universally architecture student practice. We're just terrible at drawing people, but I realized it kind of does hinder me quite a bit because yeah, you know, like when you are doing a landscape or you're doing a building or whatever, it's really good to put a person in for scale to understand proportion, and the viewer automatically kind of associates themselves with that figure because they can see it and they can understand, and they can be like, oh, this house is this big or this landscape is this big. So anyway, it's just a nice way, and it's also a way to like liven up the landscape, liven up your piece, give a focal point, because your eye is automatically drawn to any human. And that's what I'm doing today, and I will put the link down below to a video that I was following when I was doing this. There are like some live drawing types of videos where they have reference pictures for like, and they put it up for like 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, and you just follow along basically. And yeah, so I'll put the link to that below. But the bulk of what I'm going to be talking about today is my book recommendations, because I was thinking, what on earth am I going to talk about? And I thought books would be a great idea. And if you hear any noises in the background, I apologise. It's kind of hard to find like a good time to record. If it's either I have to record like super early morning or super late at night to ensure that there are no sounds present. But this is going to be a long recording, so I just thought I'd start a bit earlier. So I have a lot of books to get through actually. And if you want, you can totally just mute this and put on whatever you want in the background. You don't have to listen to this. But I'm going to be talking through different book recommendations. I have 3 categories. So we have creative books, that's what I'm going to be talking about first, and then non-fiction books, and then fiction books. So I think I'm going to be giving like a wide range of different types of books that I like. Probably books that maybe aren't recommended. I'm not really a big fan of like super popular books, at least the ones that I see in my like library recommendations, for example. I'm not going to name specific authors, but yeah, I guess I am pretty picky these days when it comes to books. So you can be assured that they are going to be relatively interesting recommendations, at least I hope so. So anyway, let's get started with the book recommendations. So the first set of books is the creative set of books. A couple of these will be very popular, such as the first one, which is The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. So this is a book that I read maybe first year or second year of university, and I loved it. It is basically, it's kind of like a self-help book for creatives, and it's very easy to read. In fact, I would have loved it if I had it as a physical copy, because it's just one of those things where you want to highlight it. I can't even say it's a chapter, but it's like split into just various, okay, let's call them chapters, but each chapter, like the maximum length of one chapter would be like 1.5 pages, and even then he writes not even in paragraphs but like in 1-liners or 2-liners, and the way he writes is very like as if someone's speaking to you. It's kind of like someone's giving you a pep talk in every page. Like, you know, if you read it daily, if you read like one chapter daily, it would be like a daily pep talk. It's kind of cool, and basically it talks about the fact of resistance, which I think I've probably talked about on this channel before, but basically resistance is that thing in your brain that's telling you, oh no, I don't want to make art. And the War of Art is basically talking about the war against resistance, essentially. And Steven Pressfield kind of takes you through that, and he takes it through it in a very easy to understand, simple, relatable way. And even though it's not necessarily a practical book as such, it is definitely something which will motivate you. It's good to kind of read when you're feeling down creatively, and kind of if you need a kick in the butt type of thing. This is definitely that kind of book. Maybe it's a bit extreme for some people, especially if you need like a softer touch kind of thing, but it definitely worked for me. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. He also had a follow-up book, but I forgot the title, but I'll put it on the screen. But it wasn't, as follow-up books normally are, they're not as good as the first one, because there is a expectation that it has to live up to, and it didn't quite live up to that. But nonetheless, it was still pretty good, but you can just go by with reading War of Art and you'd be good. Alright, so that was the first book, and then the second book I would recommend is Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. Again, this was another book that I read very early on in my creative career, which started about 2016. So again, it's one of those books that's like really easy to read. I have a physical copy of it, which is nice. And it's not really a reading book as such. It's like kind of like he inserts pictures here and there. He inserts illustrations and doodles, and it's quite fun. It's quite playful. Very short chapters, and even the size of it, like the way it's laid out, it's a square format, so it's quite nice. Very unique. And he also has a series of follow-ups like Show Your Work, and there was another one as well. So again, there's like a set of 3 books, but Steal Like an Artist is the first in that set, and it basically teaches you creative techniques on how to be an artist, basically, like saying things like, literally steal. That's one thing. I think he talked about swipe files. He talks about various things. And okay, one thing that I should probably mention is that I'm not someone who's good at summaries, and I hate giving summaries. I hate kind of like detailing what each book is about, but I'd rather just give like a holistic summary of what I felt about the book. So apologies if you are looking for a summary of what the book is exactly about, but you can just go and research what the book is about. I'll put links to everything below. I'll put the Goodreads of everything below, so you can just click on it and check it out, because I am not bothered to make a summary and relate that to you. But Steal Like an Artist is great if you, again, are in a creative rut and you need more of a practical approach. Practical but still kind of motivational approach onto how to get out of a creative rut. So yeah. The third book that I wanted to talk about is The Creative Habit by Twyla Tharp, which is another book that is quite popular. It's kind of old, actually. Twyla Tharp is a dancer, and she talks about, well, developing the creative habit. I think obviously dancers are known to be very disciplined when it comes to their craft, and so she writes about kind of how to cultivate your creative habit and more practical exercises, I would say. Now, I should give a disclaimer that I have not actually finished the book. I started reading it yonks ago, like literally so long ago, so I don't really remember it, but I do remember that I kind of left it halfway because of its practicality. Like, you actually had to do stuff. Like, she'd write down questions, she'd write down things you'd have to do, and that's great. Like, if you're looking for that kind of workbook type of book, then this is definitely something that you should probably check out. But yeah, I kind of have an anxiety over practical books, because I'm the kind of person who just wants to read a book and finish it. That's not necessarily a good thing. But if you are looking for a book like that, then I would recommend The Creative Habit. The next book that I wanted to recommend is a book which is about the life of Claude Monet, who is an artist whom I really admire a lot. And this was a book that was recommended by an artist whom I follow on Instagram. She's a really cool artist, actually. She kind of does all kinds of weird and wacky stuff. And it's called Mad Enchantment by Ross King. And it basically just talks through the life of Monet, kind of from his the start of his artistic career. So it's really nice because it's not like cut and dry. It's not boring to read. It kind of flits back and forth. It talks about all the different people in his life as well, like his family, his friends, which included very influential people like the French president at the time, whose name I've very conveniently forgotten, and it talks about all kinds of people, like the artists around him at that time, the political events that were happening at the time, and his personal life in general. And it's really fascinating. It's just one of those things where it's like, it's kind of like reading a fiction book, but you're reading about a real life artist. So it's nice, and I would recommend it. And also just to keep it on your bookshelf, it's so pretty, like, because it has the cover page of the water lilies. So it's just really nice just to have on your shelf anyway. And yeah, and it's overall just a nice kind of, I would say, Saturday afternoon, Sunday afternoon book, which you can just curl up and read with a nice cup of tea. Just really chill, really relaxing. Nothing too strenuous on the brain, unlike the previous books. Alright, so the next book that I wanted to recommend is a translation of a Japanese book called In Praise of Shadows by Junichiro Tanzaki. It's not a book that would get recommended very easily, and I think the reason I found it was in my university library. I just picked it up probably because it was a Japanese author and I was kind of fascinated, and it was such a short book. It's a very, very small book, less than 100 pages definitely, and it basically is talking about the Japanese versus Western concept of light and shadow, and how Western culture really tends to prefer bright, gleaming things. Like, they like things out in the light, whereas Japanese are really, the culture itself is a lot more shadowy. I mean, hence the title, In Praise of Shadows. That's what Japanese culture is about. It's about celebrating kind of the darkness, the quietness, the solitude, natural lighting, natural shadows. And it's just really, it's a really well written book. And the thing with translated books is I never know if it's the translation that's really well done or if it's the actual writing itself. I feel the exact same about Haruki Murakami's books, because the books themselves, the prose is just, oh, I love it. That's the main reason I love his books, is because of the prose. But I can never tell if it's because of the translator or the Murakami himself. I'm assuming it's Murakami because the consistency of the prose is consistent across all the books. So anyways, that was a sidetrack. Back to In Praise of Shadows. I really liked it because, I don't know, like, it just, I feel like I really like books that talk about kind of culture differences. I like books that talk about culture, basically. And I really like the examples that he gave. He talks about things like the quality, how paper would be different, because, for example, in the West, we use white paper, right? But in Eastern cultures, if you look at calligraphy paper, it's very kind of, it's yellow, first of all, and it's very textured, and it's kind of muddy almost. The paper itself, like, it's kind of, it has this like translucent quality, and that's kind of how Japanese culture is, and I think that's really beautiful and very interesting. He even talks about things like food, interiors, living spaces, plays, just various different contexts, and just the way he writes is so nice, and it's such a short book that you can finish it really easily. So yeah, I would recommend that. I thought I would like his other work. I've yet to try most of it, but I did start reading Makioko Sisters, I think it's called. But I'm not really a big fan. It is fiction, but it doesn't really seem like there's a story to it. I'm not sure. Maybe it's still early days. But yeah, In Praise of Shadows. You should check it out. And the last book that I wanted to recommend in creative books is actually probably supposed to be in fiction books, but it kind of falls along similar lines of In Praise of Shadows. Maybe the reason I'm saying that is because they're both tiny books which look very similar to each other on my bookshelf, because they're both like black and red. But it's called Einstein's Dreams, and it basically talks about the dreams of Albert Einstein as he develops his theory of time as part of the theory of relativity. So each chapter is basically one of his dreams or one of his theories of time and relativity, and it envisions a different world where time behaves differently. So, for example, one chapter would be time is circular, another chapter is time is only the present moment. Another chapter is like time is, I don't even know, like it goes back, time rewinds. It's just fascinating. Like, it's really good for someone who has a very vivid imagination, and I feel like in my head, like, I really wanted to make some kind of art or creative output based on the book, because I think it would be really fascinating. But like an animation, maybe it would be really nice to see the book as an animation. Obviously that's completely out of my scope, but one day maybe, who knows. But the book itself is a very good creative launchpad, I think. The way it's written is beautiful, the presentation of the book itself is beautiful, and yeah, I think it's just a really nice book for creatives to read, just for inspiration itself. And also it's kind of like a life philosophy type of book as well, so yeah, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, then you should check it out. Alright, we are 16 minutes into this thing, and I really hope that I don't overscore or underscore the time, undershoot the time. I've made so many grammatical errors in this voiceover so far. I don't know if it's because I'm nervous or what, but yeah, it's bad, seriously. Right, let's move on to non-fiction books. So non-fiction self-help was something I really got into in 2016. I think 2016 was just like my year. Like, that was when I kind of just changed and became like a person in a way. But yeah, I really got into self-help books in university. I'm still really into them. I'm not sure if it's made much of a difference. Maybe it has. But anyway, I'm going to share a few non-fiction books that I really like. One of which is called Blink, which I read recently. And it's by Malcolm Gladwell, whose writing I actually really like, and I'm currently reading his other book called The Tipping Point, which was written in the early 2000s. I think Blink was written relatively later. And Blink is basically talking about snap judgments and how they're much more efficient than conscious deliberation. And basically talking about intuition, which is something that I really like because I really believe in intuition, especially as a creative. I think it's really important to hone your intuition and develop it. But the thing with kind of trusting intuition is that you need to train yourself to do that a lot. You know, people who are able to make efficient snap judgments, they are able to do that because they've trained a lot, and they've kind of put themselves under a lot of training and pressure in order to perform well under pressure. It's kind of like when, and I think Malcolm gives this example in the book, it's like when police or people who work in hospitals, they do a lot of training, right? So that when they are working under pressure in that moment, in that critical moment, they are able to think, you know, with a clear, calm head because they've trained so much for it. So that's basically what the book is talking about, and I really liked his. Again, I'm a sucker for someone who writes well. Like, I may not understand the story, I may not understand the concept, but if you write really well, then I'm hooked into the book. And there's been several books that I've actually loved because of just the writing itself. Murakami being one of them, definitely, and Gladwell is another one. But his content as well is just amazing. Like, the way he researches and pulls all that research together is amazing. Like, he can basically take all these different narratives and just weave them all together into one thing. Like, he talks about a lot of different stories, a lot of different case studies, and somehow he just weaves them all together, and it's awesome. It's really, really great. So I would highly recommend Blink, because as creatives, you really need to hone your intuition. The next book I'd like to recommend is actually a book which I discovered when I was in university. Again, most of these are from university. It's called Quiet by Susan Cain. Now, funny story, actually. I initially read the book Quiet Power by Susan Cain, and I was like, this is such an interesting book. It's so easily readable, and it's very simple language, and it even had like quirky little illustrations and stuff, and I thought, this is such a fun book. And then it turns out that Quiet Power is actually for kids. And I was like, oh, no wonder this is so, this has so many kid examples and it's so easy to read. But actually, I really recommend Quiet Power more so than the adult, quote-unquote adult version, which is called Quiet, because Quiet Power, I think, is, first of all, very easy to read, like I said, so which makes it just so much better. But it also it also has a lot more practical examples, whereas the book Quiet, which is the adult version, is a lot more theoretical. It's delving deeper into a lot more like research and papers, and kind of getting into the nitty-gritty stuff, which is kind of boring. So I'd actually recommend that you get both books, both the adult and the kids version, because first of all, you never know who you can give it to. Actually, I don't even think I mentioned what the book was about. The book is about the power of introverts. I don't think I mentioned that. So basically that's what the book is about, because growing up, we're told that we're kind of subconsciously told that extroverts are better because, I remember when I was in school, the one comment that all teachers had for my parents was, she doesn't talk enough in class, she doesn't raise her hand enough in class, as if that was a bad thing. I mean, it didn't really affect my grades, so like, why did it matter, But Cain argues that modern Western culture misunderstands and undervalues the traits and capabilities of introverted people, which is true, actually, because if you think about it, in Asian cultures, being quote-unquote introverted is considered a good sign, even though it's considered also a sign of submissiveness, which may be bad. But again, this kind of goes back to the In Praise of Shadows book, where Junichiro is kind of arguing about the differences between Western and Eastern culture. And it's these kind of books that I find fascinating. I think it's awesome to see the difference and kind of move away from a Eurocentric perspective and start to kind of feed in different perspectives of the world into your own worldview and kind of make your own judgments, rather than following the crowd and just, being a sheep, basically. Let's move on to the next book in the non-fiction category, which is The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. And again, it's a Japanese book. I believe it is translated, and it's talking about the work of the 19th century psychologist Alfred Adler, who is kind of the contemporary of Freud, and he established that happiness lies in the hands of the human individual and does not depend on past traumas. So basically, for example, if you say that, oh, I was bullied as a kid, so therefore I have social anxiety, that's not how it works in Adlerian psychology. It is the case of you want to be socially anxious, so you attribute it to your past traumas of bullying or whatever. I think that was a very crude and simple explanation of what the book is about, but that's kind of what it is. And the really cool thing about this book is that it's basically a kind of like a play, where it's like a conversation narrated between a youth and the what's his name, the elder, or the I forgot his name, but it's basically a conversation between these two people, and it's cool. Like, it's really nice, and it's kind of very easy to digest, I would say. Like, it's not written in difficult language, and I think that's really important when it comes to kind of self-help books, is that they shouldn't be written in difficult language, and it's also just an interesting format as well. So it personally really changed my perspective and outlook on life in general, so I would highly recommend it. And there is a sequel to it called The Courage to be Happy, which I'm currently reading at the moment, and it's basically the youth. He kind of grows up and he becomes an adult, and then he comes back to visit the elder a few years later to talk about some other stuff, which I have yet to figure out because I have not properly read it. So I would recommend that. It's just a nice kind of way to maybe change or provide a different perspective on life, really. Alright, now the next book that I want to recommend, the next couple of books that I would recommend, is not self-help, but they are more identity, autobiographical, generally autobiographical. The first one of which is Becoming by Michelle Obama. Lovely book. I think it's probably one that you've heard recommended a lot, but what I really liked about it personally is it talks about the struggles of a woman basically from every stages of her life, and it really is relatable. Even though she was the first lady of the United States of America, the things she writes about is very relatable. It's very any woman in any stage of her life can understand what she's going through, and it's very comforting to know that even someone of such a high stature is going through the stuff that just normal women go through, like juggling a full-time job and parenting and being a wife and being a daughter, and and then on top of that suddenly she becomes the first lady, and it's crazy. Like, the way she writes is just so relatable, like as if she's talking to you, very down to earth, very humble, should I say. And yeah, I mean, it's just a great read for especially women. Really, really great read. And yeah, I mean, I really don't have much more to say. I think it's just so amazing, and it's also really cool just to get insight into that kind of life. And I also really liked Obama's his first biography, autobiography, should I say. I forgot the name of it, but he wrote it. Oh, I think it's From My Father's Dreams or something. Can't remember. But it's his first autobiography, and it was before he became president, actually. I think he was just getting into politics at that time. And he was considering, I think, or someone had considered him for the presidency. So it was really interesting to read all that, because he basically talked about his upbringing, his life, growing up from a child into his teenage years, into his young adult years. And, he just, the way he writes is beautiful. First of all, it's very, very lovely. And again, fascinating insights into the life of someone who really just lived through so much, and it's really, really fascinating life. Just to read his life story, it's really something I would recommend. So yeah, both Michelle Obama's book and Barack Obama's first book. The reason I don't recommend the second book as much is because it's definitely, well, first of all, it's a fat book. I mean, I'm sure you've seen it in stores. Really, really big. And the reason it's so big, I did actually get to borrow it from my library. The reason it's so big is because he delves a lot more into politics. So it's a lot more political, as I read it from first glance, at least, which is definitely what put me off, because I didn't really care to read about so much politics. But if you're into that, then definitely, I'd recommend that book, just to know about American politics, but also world politics. But yeah, the two Obama's books I would definitely recommend. And the final book that I wanted to recommend is by an author whom I really love. He is an American Indian author called Suketu Mehta, and I read his first book, Maximalism, was it? It's about the city of Bombay, and it was fascinating. But the book that I wanted to recommend now is called This Land Is Our Land, and it's basically talking about his own experiences as an Indian-born teenager who then moved to New York and grew up there. And he basically talks about identity and immigration around the world, and about how, this anti-immigrant backlash, he kind of scrutinizes that from different perspectives, from different countries. And it's just great, because if you are someone who is an immigrant, or if you have like multiple identities or whatever, like you're from one place or you're living in another, these kinds of books are always great to read. They're always relatable, no matter where the person is from. Obviously, it helps this guy's Indian, so I can relate on that level. But even if this guy was from, I don't know, let's say Japan, and he moved to America, and he's talking about identity politics, let's say, it's something that every immigrant can relate to. And the more I grew older, the more I realized that there are probably more immigrants than there are people who stay in their home countries and kind of are from there. Obviously, statistically, I have no idea, but it feels like that, because it's kind of rare that I meet someone who has just a singular identity at this point. Maybe it's because I live in Dubai as well. That obviously plays a very big role, but even when I was living in the UK, there was just so many people who are from here, but they grew up here, or they were born here, and they have some kind of dual or multiple identity, and that kind of ties everyone together. I think that sense of not belonging to one place or another. And honestly, identity is that one thing in my life that I would love to escape from. I would love to not have to talk about, but I always end up talking about it. Obviously not on this channel, but just in life in general, because it's the one thing that kind of comes up a lot in conversation. So yeah, it's just something that you can't avoid, and I think this book really, really beautifully talks about it. Not just beautifully, but in a very hard-hitting way. And Mehta writes very well as well. So yeah, you can be rest assured that this is a great book to learn about identity. Alright, in the final stretch of this drawing session, I'm going to be talking about fiction books. Now, this is definitely the category which I have grown up with, like let's say 90% of the books, 80% of the books that I read in my life are definitely fiction books. I mean, I only got into self-help in the last few years of my life, so yeah, before that I was definitely not a non-fiction kind of person. I would just read fiction all the time. Which is kind of strange because my imagination's not that wild, so so I'm wondering what happened to all those books. But there are a few fiction books that I wanted to recommend, which maybe you've not heard of, and they're all, I'm looking at them now, and they are all POC books, people of culture books. So that is also a great start. I know obviously that there has been a big trend in POC books over the last few years, but definitely it's something that we should continue to support, because as I said before, it's nice to be able to move away from the Eurocentric standard and let's say perspective and way of living that we've all been indoctrinated with throughout our lives. So the first book that I would like to recommend is actually a book that I listened to during lockdown in 2020. I really got into audiobooks because Scribd, the online reading app, was giving out, I think, like a 2-month free trial or something in light of the pandemic and whatever, which really did actually help me because I listened to so many audiobooks when I was working from home, and that really was just such a game changer for me. And the one book that I remember really, really well, maybe it's because it was the first one, but also it was just a very vivid experience, is The Tea-Girl of Hummingbird Lane by Lisa C. Now, I think it's awesome to listen to audiobooks which are fiction because it's literally like listening to a movie. Like you're basically, you see it in your head, which is crazy. Like when you're reading and you're seeing it in your head, that's one thing. But when you're listening to it, because the voice actor or the voice reader, whoever, they kind of put their own spin on it, and they obviously act out the voices, and they have a cadence to their voice which kind of really slows down the pace. Because when I'm reading, I read super fast because I'm the kind of person, like I said before, who just wants to finish. But when I'm listening to an audiobook, obviously I have to listen at their pace. Even if I speed it up, sometimes I can't understand, so I have to listen at like 1.5 or even 1.25. And it was really a game changer for me, listening to audiobooks. Because this book in particular, The Tea-Girl of Hummingbird Lane, basically talks about a young Chinese girl who kind of moves around. It talks about her throughout her life, basically, and how she kind of navigates life being thrown from a small provincial, not even town, like literally a remote mountain village, to going to the big city, to going to America, to going back to China. And it's fascinating. Like, I love these kinds of stories. And it's just the world building, and it was really, really spectacular. And I think Lisa C's books are very, very good. She does a very good job of researching and understanding the cultural context of her, whatever she's writing about. I know she also wrote a book about the mermaid women, which are basically the pearl sea divers in South Korea. That was a book I wasn't able to read, but I'm sure it would have been just as great. But yeah, The Tea-Girl of Hummingbird Lane is very good, very vivid and visual, and I would definitely recommend the audiobook for that one. The next book that I would recommend is Pachinko by Jin Lee. Now, this is kind of maybe you're definitely going to see a theme throughout the fiction books, because I have a very particular affection for historical fiction. I love historical plus cultural fiction. Like, that just makes it even more of a game changer. And pretty much all of these books, except the last one, are historical fiction. Because I just love that kind of stuff. I just love reading about history, but in a fiction format. Just amazing. And Pachinko is great because it talks about, I think, about 5 generations of South Korean families or women. Can't remember exactly, but I do remember just the way it flowed was really nice. It really immerses you in that world from, you know, old Korea, like the old dynasty, to Japanese invasion. And I think the family goes to, like, they have to go to Japan and then coming back to modern day Korea and like the rebuilding of Korea and everything. It's just super, super fascinating. And yeah, I would highly recommend it. And also the cover of that book is really, really beautiful as well. Along very similar lines, we have Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, which takes the, I would say, almost time travel, the kind of, you know, talking about generations of families or women or whatever. It takes it to another level because Homegoing spans 300 years, which is crazy, right? And it basically talks about, I think in Nigeria, if I'm not wrong, talks about women. It talks about, I think, 2 women, 1 woman, and kind of how their trajectories through their lineage kind of meet and disperse. And it's just so fascinating the way, again, how she writes. I don't know how these authors do it, like with the research and kind of getting into the world and getting into the narrative of that woman. It's just so fascinating. It really, really is a beautiful book, and it's also really nice to read books about Africa because I don't do that enough. So yeah, I mean, it's nice to see things from different perspectives, and I really enjoyed it actually. So I would definitely recommend those 2 books. And now the final book that I would like to recommend, wrapping up the video, is Kim Ji-young, born 1982, which is, again, a short story, relatively short story, about a woman who is kind of suffering from depression. She has a child, and she has a husband, and she's kind of suffering from a depression, and it kind of talks through her life. And it basically talks about women's inequality in Korea, but also in the world in general. And it's very, very well written. Obviously, Korean movies and Korean dramas have become super popular in the last couple of years, so everyone knows at this point how much of a turn they can take, and this book is no exception. I was really shocked when I read this book. You basically just read this book till the end because it is so worth it. And there is also a movie, which I have yet to watch, but I am looking forward to watching that. But it is definitely a book that really shocked my system, and it's a book I would recommend to anyone, literally, not just women, because it's very important to highlight kind of the inequality that women face through both genders, through all genders, should I say. And yeah, there's literally no way of me explaining it without spoiling it. So it's kind of one of those books that you kind of you need to read again. Like, I don't even know, but basically read it. It's great. I think any woman would really empathize with it and understand it. And so yeah, I think that is everything on my list, and that concludes Very Good Time, actually. So thank you so much for watching. I hope this was relatively interesting, useful, entertaining, kept you company. And I apologize for all the blunders and the mistakes and the grammatical errors and all the ums and ahs throughout this entire narrative. Clearly, I've not had practice in a long time, but thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time for another video. Bye!